we are very much in this first orange box of feasibility. The very first thing that would have to happen to set up a demand management program is that every upper division state would have to make a finding that demand management is feasible. Now, each upper division state is in the midst of their own feasibility investigations, and each state is really looking at things from their own unique perspectives, based on their own unique water issues, and in consultation with their water users. But there are a lot of questions there for everyone, like how would we fund this scale of program, which is something I'm sure we're all thinking about a bit more, given the turmoil of the last several months than we even were before. So once each upper division state were to make a feasibility determination, if they do so, then we would have to do the hard work of actually setting up a demand management program. The upper division states would need to reach some key agreements on how that program would operate, how that water would be stored and released and things like that. We would also have to consult with the lower basin states. And one reason for that, or one way to think about it, is this would give the upper division states a tool for saving water in Lake Powell that otherwise would likely be released to the lower basin pursuant to the operational guidelines currently in place. So they're going to want to know how exactly we're accounting for this and storing this water. We'd also need to reach some agreements with the Secretary of Interior on the program. So, and of course, just that final round of approvals would be needed as well. So this all just illustrates there are a lot of things that would need to happen before we actually get to the point of setting up a demand management program. Oh, and could you go ahead and skip to the next slide? Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. So that brings us to Colorado. What does that mean for us? What the DCP did and the Demand Management Storage Agreement did was really was the starting point for the state-to-state discussions, the intrastate discussion of whether demand management would be feasible. In Colorado, our board adopted a couple policies right around the time that the DCP was finalized, and one of them was the 2019 work plan that really laid out the framework for the first year of Colorado's feasibility investigation. Now our board is leading this. The Colorado Water Conservation Board, as Greg mentioned, they have a workshop coming up in a week to really dig in with a little bit more depth into all these issues, but they're really leading this effort. So this work plan, which was adopted a little over a year ago, like I said, was really intended to get us through the first fiscal year that just ended. And it was really designed to help our board identify and really consider the initial threshold issues associated with the feasibility question. And to accomplish that and to help facilitate that, the work plan had three key elements. One is work groups, and we'll talk a lot about that in those and in the progress they've made today. The next is regional workshops. And as Greg said, we've held a couple of those. The COVID situation has made it obviously a lot more difficult to hold those in person, but we're doing this virtual workshop today as part of that. And of course, just continued education and outreach. And that, is a key element with really everything that we do at CWCB. So this work really took place through the last fiscal year, as I said, which leads us to today. We developed a report that really details a lot of the work done in this initial stage of the feasibility investigation, and I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time today going over the key elements of that report. This just kind of lays out the structure of the report. I want to mention right away, it's available on our website. If you haven't taken a look at it, definitely do so. The first bit of the report is focused on context and a lot of background information about why we're talking about this, the DCP, really just setting the stage for what it is we're doing. It also provides some information about the policies adopted by our board back in November 2018, and then the work plan adopted a few months after that. And I think those are really important starting points because they kind of share the board's thinking on what the framework issues are in their feasibility investigation. So to continue on, there's a section on common themes that I'll get into shortly, and those are just kind of the high-level issues that a lot of the work groups identified. Then a deeper dive into each of the work groups and the topics they discussed, update on the regional workshops, education and outreach, and the ongoing literature review that we have consultants helping us with, and also a future planning section. So that's just kind of the layout of the report. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the substance of it. So the first big part of this report is common themes. As many of you likely know and maybe attended, we had a big demand management work group and IVCC joint workshop back in March, which I just have to say feels like a really long time ago at this point. But we really wanted to bring the work groups together to talk about some cross-cutting issues and to identify the big, issues, priority issues that they view associated with the demand management program. So I'm just going to go over some of those key themes and issues that they identified. The first one is community viability and local benefits. So one thing that was really identified just at the beginning of all this was, and throughout it really, was we need to understand the benefits and impacts to local communities that could occur if there's a demand management program put in place. Now, the purpose of a demand management program would be to create compact security, to avoid a curtailment situation. So presumably there would be some benefits realized from that because people wouldn't be involuntarily curtailed. That being said, there could also be some impacts to communities, say if you have a lot of participation in one particular area. So how do we understand those and what can we do to address them? What can we do to really create long-term sustainability and agricultural viability in any type of program like this? And then this concept of simplicity and flexibility, I think of this kind of in two different ways. One is on the participation side. So we don't want to create a program that is so burdensome to participate in that people don't want to. We also don't want to create a program that is so complicated or costly to operate that it would be difficult on on the flip side of it, on our side of the administering a program. So we need to keep those issues in mind, but also how do we create the level of review and scrutiny that would be needed in a program like this? So that's just kind of an ongoing push and pull that we deal with. And then creation of a net positive program. This is really, looking at to start a potential statewide benefit that could come out of a demand management program, that compact curtailment avoidance situation. But beyond that, how can we create other benefits for our state if we do set up a program like this? Environmental benefits, recreational benefits. What are the factors we need to look at to ensure that we're considering those things? The next one is a really big one, and that's equity and fairness. And I want to call this out a little bit now because this is actually one of the points that we got a question on and something that we get a lot of input and discussion around. So I went back to the November 2018 policy statement from our board because that's really where this came from and how it started. And I thought it would be beneficial just to revisit that. So the statement is available on our website, but just to kind of highlight that equity piece of it, the policy states that the board is giving direction to prioritize avoidance of disproportionate negative economic or environmental impacts to any single subbasin or region within Colorado, while protecting the legal rights of water rights holders. Further, the board will work with water rights holders and stakeholders to assess the feasibility of and promote mechanisms for obtaining roughly proportionate contributions of water consumptively used from the Colorado River system to a demand management program over a given time frame from participants on each side of the Continental Divide. So that's a mouthful, there's a lot there, but I thought it was just important to get that all out because we talk about this so frequently in shorthand terms. We talk about it in terms of equity. But what this statement speaks to is proportionality and issues dealing with the West Slope and the Front Range and how we make sure that we have a balanced program. So I think it's important to remember what it is that the board gave us direction to do and to consider through this. So what does that mean? We've gotten a lot of questions about, well, what does that mean in terms of the voluntariness of a potential program? And I just want to say today, I've said it many times before, no one would ever be forced to participate in a potential demand management program. There would never be a situation where we're saying, we need X amount of participants in this area. That's just not how we would envision it working. It would be a voluntary program. That being said, when we're looking at certain areas or basins where we want to consider what the impacts might be if there's a lot of participation, or, encourage participation from across the state if the program is to be set up, we would need to do all that within those confines of a voluntary program. It would be a voluntary program. We'll say it again. So, what exactly that looks like, what kind of, local coordination would need to be in place to facilitate that. Those are ongoing questions and ongoing issues. And while I'm not here today with any answers about it, what I can say is that the board indicated back in November of 2018, and they continue to be committed to working through that issue and looking at what it means. And I'll get into this in a little bit, but IBCC has been a lot of help in working on that issue as well. So the next one, a big one, funding uncertainties. I think that kind of speaks for itself, but there were a lot of uncertainties around how we would fund this scale of a program before March. And since then, it has just become even more of an open question and a bigger question, frankly. So that's something that is on our minds more than ever. Data gaps. This was just kind of a point that there are a lot of open questions still with demand management, particularly thinking about on-farm impacts of particular types of conservation activities. How do we go about analyzing those and looking at them? And finally, this question of demand management versus compact administration. This wasn't exactly a value identified at the March workshop. It wasn't exactly one of those things that the work groups put on the board as something that needs to be figured out, but rather just something that seems to come up a lot. These two things are related in that demand management ideally would help us avoid or mitigate a compact administration situation. But so in other words, demand management is a potential avoidance technique for compact administration. But they're not, obviously, they're very, very different things. Demand management would be a proactive voluntary program, whereas compact administration would be reactive in a situation where we were, accused of overusing, for example. We don't know what compact administration would look like. There are a lot of open questions about that. What we do know is it would likely lead to a lot of uncertainty for the state, a lot of litigation. And, it's something that, again, there's just a lot of uncertainty around. So again, at that March workshop, we gave the work groups an opportunity to kind of visually identify what are the big values, what are the big issues that you see with demand management, and what do we need to make sure we're protecting as part of a demand management program, or what are the goals we want to make sure we're furthering. And this kind of goes over all of those that I just described, but it's just a visual representation of those things. And this and some other similar type charts are in the report. So I'd encourage anyone who wants to dig in a little bit more to look at that report. But now I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing a kind of deeper dive into the work groups and their specific lines of discussion. So I'm going to start with the agricultural impacts work group. They kind of had a couple different lines of thought. One, or ways that they went about thinking about this. One was, what are the key principles associated with demand management? In other words, if we're going to set up a program, what are the things that we need to ensure will be part of it? And one of those top things, again, is that equity and proportionality question, but also while remaining voluntary, which is what I just addressed a little bit ago. The next thing is, while we have those priorities, and non-injury to water rights users would be another key element. The other part of that, the flip side of that coin, is what are the big data gaps? What are the things that we really don't know yet that we would want to know before setting up a program? Some things like that would be on-farm and off-farm economic impacts. So what are the economic impacts of this type of activity? You can think of that in terms of on-farm impacts, but also community level issues. So all of these things also implicate the actual application process. So for water rights holders to make appropriate decisions, things need to be timed appropriately, and the application process needs to be considered and all that. So next, the economic impacts and local government work group. They kind of talked a lot about community level impacts of a demand management program, and ultimately landed on this just a key principle as a starting point, that demand management, if a program is set up, shouldn't do harm to local communities. And if there are some negative impacts, we should look at how we can mitigate them. When we can, we should be creating benefits for not only individuals who participate, but also the community and the economy. So how could we set up a program that would actually effectuate those things? And again, to get there, you really have to think about different levels of process, different levels of review and approval. So those are some of the things that the Economic Impacts and Local Government Work Group talked about. Next, the Education and Outreach Work Group. They had a lot of discussion about the phasing of this. There are different communications needs in this initial stage, the feasibility analysis, than there would be if a program is set up. So how do we consider those, separate them, but also identify kind of the common threads here? The things that we need to figure out no matter what stage we're in, things like how do we define terms? How do we have a common language that we're all speaking? Those things are really, really important. Beyond that, how do we make sure that we are inclusive in our messaging? How do we make sure we're reaching everyone and are using the appropriate lines of communication for everyone who might want to know about this or who might be involved in it? The next work group is the Environmental Considerations Work Group. They kind of started with the premise that, look, this program would be set up to create compact security, right? It's not exactly an environmental benefits program. That being said, on a project-by-project level, there might be opportunities to create environmental benefits. So how do we identify those? Do we have tools at our disposal to track those and identify what they might be and kind of look at projects through that lens? And one thing that they found is that there hasn't, unfortunately, been a lot of research done on the environmental impacts of or benefits of various types of conservation activities. So that might be an area for further study. Next, the funding work group. Again, my heart goes out to this group because they had a big challenge to begin with, and it only became bigger. So they identified pretty early on that just at a programmatic scale, there are a lot of issues you need to work through to even begin to get at the funding questions. How big of a program are we looking at? What would the time frame be for this type of program? And what does that mean for funding? So they kind of worked on this programmatic level scenario analysis and looked at various iterations of how the program could function and considered the funding implications for those various program designs. Again, just as they were wrapping up their meetings, all of this COVID stuff hit and created a lot of complications in how they were thinking about things. So this is another area where it would be helpful to think a little bit more about how funding could work for this scale of a program, given the current situation we find ourselves in. Next is the Law and Policy Work Group. So the Law and Policy Work Group really started with the framework of the Demand Management Storage Agreement, as well as the CWCB board's policies adopted that I've discussed, that November policy and the work plan, and considered, what are the turning points in each of these framework documents that could determine how a demand management program and if a demand management program could operate within the state. And I'll hit on one of those issues with a little bit more specificity, because this is another thing that was raised in the questions that we got. The question of beneficial use, whether demand management could be, or compact compliance via demand management could be viewed as a beneficial use. And what I will say is the Law and Policy Work Group did some great analysis on that. Their document on that is included in the report, and I would encourage everyone to go read it. And I think that that particular analysis really highlights is that while compact compliance has been considered a beneficial use in some contexts, demand management is kind of a different animal in some ways. So there are some outstanding questions there. But what I think that this question and this report really highlight is that the work groups were not assigned to answer these questions. They were not given the task of giving the board or anyone clear answers about how this should all work or what the legal mechanisms are for doing it. They just kind of laid out the threshold issues. That being said, there were a lot of things that the work groups identified that are a little bit more concrete, that are helpful tools that might help us as we continue in this investigation. So to get back to the law and policy work group, they did a few other analyses as well on compact compliance and what that means, eligibility to participate in the program, and the definition of temporary for purposes of demand management. So I would just encourage, again, everyone to take a look at those documents. They're attached, all the work group documents are attached to the report. The monitoring and verification work group, they also, similar to the Ag Impacts work group, I would say they thought about things in terms of key principles, but also on the ground, what would this actually look like and what more do we need to know? So this slide kind of shows some key principles that they identified, but based on these, they did a great job of working through some hypothetical types of projects and looked just at how it would work on the ground. So, there are so many levels of this discussion. Some of them are those policy, legal questions, threshold issues that we would need to work out. Some of them are just, how would this work? How would this actually operate on the ground? And the monitoring and verification work group really focused in on that. Similarly, the administration and accounting work group took a really similar approach. They had some key principles, but they also looked at some hypotheticals and thought, okay, on the ground, how would this type of project actually work? So those are the work groups, and those are kind of the high points, but I'll just say it again. I would encourage everyone to take a look at the report. Each work group put together kind of a summary document or analysis. Some of them have multiple documents, so there's a lot there to dig into. In addition to our work groups, we also had the Interbasin Compact Committee working on the very difficult question of equity. And again, we're using equity as kind of a term for the big question of proportionality, or it's kind of in the eye of the beholder, not only what it means, but also how exactly you define it, or what you call it, rather. So IBCC focused in on this question and has provided a lot of helpful input, but they really kind of focused their discussions on a couple things. First is how do we define equity? What does that mean? And then the next question is it possible to create a demand management program that is equitable? And one of the big findings was that this equity is in the eye of the beholder, that different people have different definitions, of course, of what equity might mean in a demand management program. So like I said earlier, we don't have any answers today to what it means, but what I can say is that I know that the board is committed to continuing to work on this really important question. And next, I just wanted to provide an update on, we also are having ongoing discussions with Colorado's two tribes, Southern Ute and the Ute Mountain Ute, and we've been having those discussions on a government to government level. So we haven't, produced the reports that you see from the other work groups, but we've had some great discussions, and we're hopeful that we'll continue those discussions going forward. So, the next big piece of this is that we've brought consultants on board to help us with a literature review on the demand management issues. And they kind of aligned with the work groups that we developed. But the funding that we have for them is extended into this current fiscal year. So we have them longer, which is really, really great. They were able to attend some of the meetings of the work groups, but we look forward to them continuing the important work they're doing and really helping us do some additional analysis that we might not have had the capacity to do otherwise. So what I want to encourage everyone to do now is to get involved somehow in this discussion if you would like to do so. I'll say it again, I've said it a lot. The report is on our website. Please take a look at it. It's open for public comment through August 26th. I know that that's this Friday. If you need some additional time, what I can guarantee to you is that our board is going to be talking about this for a while. So we're always here if you want to provide some feedback. We've also, I should have put it up on this slide, but we have a specific email address set up to take comments and questions, demandmanagement@state.co.gov, I believe. So, check out the report, submit your comments, questions, anything that you might have. Next, listen into our board's workshop. Our board is going to be digging into this for a full day next week on September 2nd. That's going to live stream on the CWCB YouTube channel. It will be open to the public, just as all of our work group meetings have been as well. So listen into that. And, I know that this is a lot to take in. I know that it's a lot of information. But, I would ask you to stay involved and stay engaged and check our website on an ongoing basis for anything, any additional information as we go forward. So what are the next steps? As I've said a few times now, our board will be hosting a workshop next Wednesday that you can listen into. One thing that we've identified through this is that there are a lot of data gaps and research needs. So I anticipate we'll be talking a bit about, first of all, the important things we've learned through this year, but also what are the things that we still need to put some research and thought into. Another really important component here to keep in mind is, like I said at the beginning, every single upper division state, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado, we're all going through this feasibility investigation. We're all doing it, in our own ways and our own paces and based on our own issues. But we're always cognizant of that, and we are coordinating with the other states, but we're also, making sure that we're aligned. So we'll continue to coordinate with them and hear what they're doing. There are brief updates in the report on what each of the other states is doing. The UCRC is also, working on an RFP, and will likely be getting some consultants to work on some upper basin-wide issues as well. So the other thing that just is the elephant in the room through all of this is we have to take our current circumstances into account. We're doing a lot more things virtually. We are dealing with unprecedented budget challenges. So we're doing our best to keep moving forward. And I've been really excited to see how much work the work groups were able to do, notwithstanding all of this. They transitioned seamlessly to virtual formats, and I have a lot of faith that we'll continue to be able to do a lot of this important work, even in the face of all these challenges. So with that, that's about all I had to present today. But as I said, we did ask people to submit questions ahead of time, and I tried to cater my presentation to answering a lot of those questions that came up. And I also just want to let everyone know if they have comments on the report, if they have feedback that they'd really, really like our board to see, please get on the website and submit a comment. We're going to transmit all of those comments to our board. They will see them before they consider the next steps. So please get on the website and submit any comments. I'm happy to take any clarifying questions that might come up on today's presentation. And we would ask that you, I believe, message those, I think, to Sarah or a staff member here. But before we get into those, if there are any questions, I'm just going to go over a few of the other questions we received that I didn't address in the report I just gave. So the first one was this definition. What is the definition of temporary? And, kind of relatedly, or another question is, how are efficiency improvements considered in all this? And what I can say is one thing is clear, which is that we need to be looking at conserved consumptive use. So there needs to be, for a project to participate in a program, if we were to set one up, we would need to see conservation and consumptive use, more water in the river. But what is temporary? How do we define that? That, is something that we're still working on figuring out. And we appreciate all the input that we've gotten from the work groups and from a lot of interested people on what exactly this means. And I guess what I would say at this point is we need to consider this in terms of Colorado, how we view it, how, we've looked at this in the past in other ways. And also, what we're able to reach agreement to with the other states, because that's kind of a component of the program that we would need to, coordinate with other states on. That being said, I do believe that the Law and Policy Work Group actually provided some good analysis on this question as well. So for more information, you can check out their report. And the other question that we get a lot is, how does this fit in with other efforts? There are tons of things going on the Colorado River, and they're all somehow related, but they're also all unique. And so I guess, that what I can say is we are doing our best to continue to consider all of the issues, to take a holistic approach in considering what's best for Colorado going forward. And we are, of course, mindful of the need to focus on all the efforts that are going on and make sure that we're taking a coordinated approach. So, I think that I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that and check in and see if we have any questions. So it does look like we received one question about the equity statement that I quoted. And I just want to let everyone know that's in our 2018, our board's 2018 support and policy statement. We can certainly make sure that that's available prominently at our website for folks to take a look at. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in at this point. I just want to remind everyone again, this is an ongoing discussion. There is still work to be done. There are still discussions to be had. So this is not like your only chance to submit a question. If you have comments at all on the report, please go to our website to submit them. Please email us, demandmanagement@state.co.gov, to submit any questions you might have if you'd rather just talk privately. And you know what? I think I'll just go ahead and hand it over to Greg to go ahead and wrap up today. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. So I think that was a great summary of where we're at today. Please stay tuned. As we've all noted, there are many, many moving parts, of course, as this plays out over the next few months and years in the path that we have ahead for us on this. Specifically, as Amy noted, we do have the board workshop coming up next week on Wednesday, the 2nd of September. So please stay tuned on that front as well, and continue to submit the questions and comments that you have on the website that we have set up for you. That will continue to evolve along with the process. We will note the timeline on there as things move forward as well. That current public comment period is closing this Friday on the 28th. But part of the important conversation with the board moving forward will be how to continue to engage with the various constituents throughout the state throughout this entire process. So again, please stay tuned, and thank you so much for your involvement in this discussion, all the countless volunteer hours that have gone into this, and we're all excited to see what we can do to move things forward down the road.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.